just so we capture it for people who are going to be reviewing offline. Okay.
I'll rewind a bit. All right. Yeah. So I was describing the confidentiality for stored, transmitted, and processed data, and talking about how SIP is typically done over UDP. However, it's kind of, if you're a SIP developer, you take it for granted that you do SIP over UDP, but really you forget about the confidentiality. It's you're so used to it. But this is a huge problem, right? It's a huge problem that I think the CRA kind of highlights in a way. And same thing with RTP. The media is often done over RTP and not SRTP. So that is also plain text. And there is no confidentiality there being provided by either of these protocols. And just to mention an attack that would definitely affect the confidentiality of the media calls, ongoing calls. There's RTP bleed, where attackers receive RTP packets in plain text. And then, so that I could look at something that is more about stored data, I linked to this. So there was an advisory last year which spoke about stored passwords on Cisco phones without any encryption and so on. It's not clear how Cisco fixed this, and it's not clear to me, where do you stop at encrypted storage, right? Well, there are various different ways to do it, but this would fall under confidentiality for stored data. So there's a lot of nitty-gritty. There's a lot of details to be discussed, I'm sure, with regards to this and the CRA requirements. Integrity, in many ways, it's very similar to confidentiality, as in, if you don't have confidentiality, quite often you also don't have integrity. But the two are not the same, of course. One particular attack to mention is RTP inject, where attackers could insert their audio streams. We never did video streams yet. But audio streams, you can inject them into ongoing calls. And this is, of course, affected the integrity of audio calls, for example, phone calls. So those are just examples of integrity, how it may be affected by security attacks. I did not really go into this. Process only data that are adequate, relevant, limited to what is necessary, because it's so vague that
I think that connects to GDPR a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it does.
So you shouldn't have any personal data there if you really don't need it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And then there is the denial of service item in this list, which, denial of service attacks or DDoS attacks and DDoS attack simulation, the DDoS testing is close to heart for us because it is something that we do. It is something that in the past few years we focused on. So we published kind of, instructions. Last TAD Summit in November, we gave a presentation about how to do your own DDoS attack simulation and why you should do that. So that is something very interesting for us. And this is talking about that, right? And the thing is, to put IP communications into perspective, SIP flooding kind of almost always works, especially on systems that have never been tested before. And it always, what I mean by always works is it always causes SIP devices or SIP entities, servers, or even phones to stop processing calls in a reliable way. So that's a very effective attack. And what IP phones do when you flood them with SIP messages, quite often, if you're sending an invite message, then they will start ringing and will not stop ringing until maybe 5-10 minutes that you have stopped the attack. Sometimes they don't stop ringing at all, making them pretty unusable until you unplug and replug the phone if it's a hardware phone. But more interestingly is, of course, the servers, where you affect the whole entire phone system. And this can, of course, be quite detrimental. So, and I think, making phone calls and making video calls and so on and so forth, IP communications is probably falling under essential functions, right? Other attacks on the media servers themselves, not just the signaling, RTP flood and RTP bleed, they both can be used for denial of service attacks. I won't go into that too much, but yes, it's not just the signaling, but also the media servers that can be attacked, and I think fall under this one item here. But the problem is, and I heard this before, is how can they mention this? How can they include this? How can they force us to mitigate denial of service attacks?
It's very interesting when it comes to small devices, but I think the idea here is to make this sure not that the device properly works while being attacked, but that it comes back alive after the attack.
Exactly.
That's
exactly.
my
So
way
we've
of
seen
looking at this.
We've seen devices where when you attack them, they become so unusable. You can't use them anymore. You might need to reset them. Okay. We've seen servers that simply don't come up again until you've cleared up some log files because they run out of space, maybe, and so on and so forth. So there will always be limitations on resources, but there are devices and targets and servers and so on, software, that are much more robust than others. And those are usually the ones that have been tested. And of course, after testing, you have to make the adjustments necessary and test again to make sure that they are much more robust. So there are, of course, things, devices, targets that are much more brittle, and those are usually untested ones. Another one that I did not include much information, any information about, any additional information, minimize negative impact of the device for other devices on the same network. I think it's a bit vague to me. I understand where this is coming from. But yeah, I think this could be discussed a lot. And it's also related, in my opinion, to the next one, which is a limited attack surface by design, which is also similar to the default configuration in some ways. Ole, you want to say something on this?
No, go on.
Okay. Yeah, so the most obvious thing that comes to mind is administrative functionality that is enabled by default and not maybe necessary. So you might have SSH servers, for example, that ship with the box or ship with the. You might find also debug network ports without proper authentication or with some backdoor password, hard-coded password. We have seen those things. These are, of course, certainly not, limited attack surface by design sort of features. So yeah, these things. I'm glad that it's here because it's a very important topic. And then provide security information by recording and monitoring. To me, this means security logs. What does it mean to you, Ole?
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you're trying to do forensics on VoIP products, it can be quite difficult because often enough they would not have security specific logs. I remember, I think Asterisk had come up with a security log, and this is it's an admirable something I like a lot, because security logs and debug logs are different things, and what you usually have in phone systems and so on is called detail records, right? But unfortunately, those are not enough quite often. They will
They're
not
enough
tell you
for billing, but not for
exactly,
forensics.
exactly. So their point is for billing, and that's a very important function. But billing and security can be very, very separate things. So yeah, this is great that it's there. And finally, provide security updates, of course, ideally automatically to fix vulnerabilities. It's a very big topic. But yeah, one thing to mention is that firmware quite often is hard to update. You might have provisioning, so that definitely helps. But another thing that we've seen is, of course, licensing issues with proprietary phone systems in the past, when you want to apply a security protection mechanism, but your license does not allow it, right? even if you're a paying customer. And I'm not going to go into details too much, but this is something that I've seen in the past, and it's very annoying. And I hope that this particular item on the list fixes it. So yeah, that's what I had, this mind map. I hope that it gives a bit of context in terms of IP communications. Something I should mention is, if I'm not gonna say anything more, if you want to get in touch, this is my email address. And of course, yeah, our website and the newsletter that I should plug in, because every month we look at what happened in the last month, and we look at what happened in the real-time communications world, things related to security, and we comment about them, and we publish our newsletter that way. And it's I think it's very valuable to the audience of this meeting.
Absolutely.
No, I think this was excellent, Sandro. I really like the way it links all those secure by design requirements to all the exploits, and basically, it was a great advert for read the RTC Sec newsletter.
Absolutely, it's a good newsletter. I like it a lot.
Thank you.
So, do we have any other questions from the audience?
We have a few more slides. Then I think.
Oh yeah, no worry. I know you have some more slides, Ali. I'm not cutting you off. I just want to make sure that we give people the chance to ask some questions on what Sandro presented.
Absolutely.
And I'm not seeing anything at the moment. Again, Sandro's so easy to get in contact with, so you can always talk to him later. So, Ollie, back to you.
Or us. We've gone through the detailed requirements with Sandro's presentation. That was, I really love mind maps, so that was good. But I want to highlight a few other things. The SIP standard is over 20 years old, and the working group in IETF has very, very little energy. Almost everyone has moved to cooler areas in the IETF. So SIP over TLS is poorly defined. I refer here to a presentation I made in 2019 when I tried to fix this and get some energy in the IETF to fix it. But SIP over TLS is really poorly defined. Certificate usage and validation is poorly defined again. Client usage, client certificate usage is not defined at all. which is very interesting. That would be one way of handling security authentication from IP phones. So in most of the implementations, web standards are used, but that has quite a negative impact. It's better than nothing. It's opportunistic security, but it's not the SIP way. So we really need to look into that. And as Sandro said, we have a lot of implementation issues. And we haven't seen any S-bombs for IP phones. And at least I have plenty of phones where there are no firmware updates anywhere available. And for open source servers, I'm as a former member of the Asterisk open source community, I'm proud to say that we early, when Asterisk became a success story, we got a lot of security researchers helping us finding vulnerabilities. And it's a mutual understanding that they help us, we help them. But we got a very good and well-documented vulnerability handling process in place. We learned a lot, and I think that process is still working very well for Asterisk. And of course, we have a lot of CVs. We had a lot of CVs in my time, but we learned from everyone. We updated development guidelines. We discussed if the same issue was somewhere else in the code, and we fixed that part. But for other products, well, it's not as clear as I see in Asterisk. I could be wrong. OpenSIPs have recently published a very, very interesting audit done by Sandro and the gang around him in Enable Security. That audit is very, very interesting reading. You learn a lot. And they have published some CVs. I hope they will get a new process in place now and continue doing that. Kamailio has a few old CVs. We have a security policy there, but there are very few CVs filed, so the development team hasn't got the practice to work with security issues and vulnerability handling. FreeSwitch, as pointed out by Sandro, they have a short security policy on how to report vulnerabilities published on GitHub. I couldn't find anything else. And a few old advisories reported by Sandro and team, but nothing after that, which I don't really believe is the case. But it seems like either the community or researchers isn't interested, or they haven't got an active process here.
There were some, let me interrupt. There were some new reports recently, actually, which affected Sophia, the library, the SIP library.
Okay.
And they did handle that. It took a while, and it was a strange communication.
It's a different GitHub repo, so.
Yes, now that these things need to be better advertised and so on. We are trying to do our best by including these details in our newsletter. So right now, I think our newsletter seems to be the best place to look for these things.
Absolutely. But what I'm trying to say here is that all of us in the open source world needs to do this better. And the Open Source Security Foundation is going to help us with publishing templates and scorecards and other things to help us do better. I mean, one of the things they require is peer review of commits. They also require us to have make sure that everyone, for instance, on GitHub, have two-factor authentication on their accounts, and so on and so forth. Small things, but combined together, securing the supply chain. So, Sandro and the rest of you that are here in this conference, let's discuss what do you think is the current state? And do we trust the vendors to fix this in time? So will we have a shortage of IP telephones? Should we buy them now and put them in our warehouse? But we can't deliver them to customers, just for ourselves then. Are the open source servers where they need to be? Are the standards complete? Are we ready for the CRA in this world? What do you think? Turn on your microphones, your video, and let's see what happens. Sandro, you can start while the rest is preparing.
Well, I certainly think there's a lot of work to be done. um, Recently, there was this. I went to this conference, right? NALCON in Berlin. There was a very good presentation about an intercom system that these researchers, the security company, had in their new building, and they, of course, tore it apart and looked into it. And yeah, I mean, it was a device coming from China, and it had the laundry list of all the vulnerabilities you could possibly um, have. In my opinion, it supports SIP, so it's an IP communications equipment, right? It's an intercom system, so it has to do video and audio, and you can control it from your mobile app and so on and so forth. And these sort of security issues it had were default credentials, no authentication on certain endpoints, vulnerabilities in the web interface, which give you access to the underlying device, and so on and so forth. FTP, even uploading images over FTP. My point is, and this is quite a popular vendor apparently. So my point is that, yeah, there's a lot of work to be done on hardware type of devices, but also in this open source world as well. I mean, in terms of handling vulnerabilities, there are processes in place, as you mentioned, but I would like to see developers use, in my opinion, for example, the GitHub security advisory features are pretty good, and they help developers. So I would like to see more developers use that, create security policies that are public so that people know how to report things, and so on and so forth.
The floor is open, friends.
Yeah, and I'm just going to come back to the timeline for CRA. It seems impossible. Is it going to hit some political speed bumps, even with EU manufacturers? I give my knowledge of certain companies in this space. They don't have an SBOM. They don't have some of these processes in place. It seems within a year to even get the basics together. There's a lot of work here.
Yeah, absolutely. The good thing is, if you try to recruit cybersecurity specialists now, you'll see how many there are. It's really, really hard to find good people. And the EU, every country need to staff up. And they both need to handle the regular process, product withdrawals, product audits, and all that. In addition, they need to staff up on the certification.
Yes.
Where are all those people coming from?
Most of the cybersecurity people I know who are good, did the PhD and then realized, wait a minute, I could be making more money out in the commercial world. So it's like a few PhD students that were in, basically online security. Although I do like your definition, because I've always said cyber, it's a fancy word that means online. But I do like the picture you gave, and I will be referencing that in terms of the definition for cybersecurity. So it isn't a bullshit marketing term. It actually has a clear definition. So thank you for that. But there's just PhD students are the few that I see that are good, that can deliver in this space.
Yep. I mean, there's a lot of talk about shifting security left. In many development process now, we bring in people like Sandro with police uniforms that inspect a product at the end before release. Product managers are jumping, saying, we need to release. And Sandro comes in very hard saying, this is not okay. And the process goes back to development. Now we need to move Sandro to the development group. But then we need people exactly like Sandro here, who are calm, educational, can explain and have patience and work with developers. Shifting security left will change a lot. But that also means that we need cybersecurity guys that can handle that.
Yeah.
It's really fun to be pen testers and security testers and test after the release. But part of the process is equally important here.
No, that's a good point.
So yes, where are all the people? I mean, the EU is in a rush because of all the costs. And in the US, I met Brian Bellendorf at FOSDEM, the open source conference, in early February. And he said one of his motivations for Alpha Omega in the OpenSSF was that he saw a report about all the costs that belong to the Log4j incident. And he was determined to get half of that money, and we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars, to work with actually helping the open source communities. The problem is we haven't seen any similar effort in Europe.
Yeah.
So the EU is talking a lot about open source, and with one hand and the other hand to creating mistakes like this. I honestly think this text is a mistake. But we need to strengthen the open source community here.
Yes. No, absolutely. Absolutely. Do we have any other questions from the audience? Please, it's your chance to chat with the experts here, Sandro and Olle. And if not, because I know there's always people like to chat offline, what I would ask is if everybody could unmute and just show their appreciation for what is an excellent, detailed, and very practical review of the impact of CRA on real-time IP communication. So again, guys, this was perfect. I really learned a lot. You've done an excellent job here. And I think definitely we need to take this and go into more technical details as well on its implementation. And I think also from the impact it's going to have across the industry. I think, it's a fun view in terms of 2024 will be the year of no new features, just security. But I have to be honest with you, I don't see any way around it.
No. But I have one extra thing to say, because I see Max over here in a window.
Yeah,
Max, you're muted.
Hi, Sandro.
Hi. Good
Hi,
thing.
guys.
But Max has actually run an online SIP interoperability test. And that's something where we could add a lot of these features that Sandro and I discussed, and test hard SIP over TLS and see what we can do in the implementations and the standards. So thank you for running that, and I'm waiting for the next event, Max.
Yeah.
Pressure on you.
Thanks, Olle. Yeah, we definitely need to do more of those. Security is always important, but as you said, when you develop a product, it's usually like last in the priorities, unfortunately.
When security becomes part of how you develop the product, then it's not that very expensive thing that you do at the end, right? And it's gonna be a bummer because it's gonna stop you from publishing your product, right? From pushing it out. No, it becomes an enabler. That's the whole idea. Of course, this is very, very nice and shiny, and the truth is less sexy. But I do see that as being a really helpful way of thinking about security. The shift left movement, right? It kind of makes sense in many cases. Of course, it's not perfect, but it's a good way forward.
I mean, that's the important question. If the SIP phones are secure and we can trust them, if the SIP communication, our webrtc is fully secure, we can trust it. What new things can we do that we don't do today? because we don't trust it. That's the very exciting discussion.
Absolutely.
But then
There's a lot
sadly
that
we
can
come
be
into
done.
chat control and all that mess, but that's another topic.
Cool. So what I would suggest, given we've been going now for an hour and a half, so I think everybody has reached that point. But again, I would just like to say, Olle, Sandro, an excellent presentation in helping us all understand the impact of the EU's CRA, but also all those practical examples just to show the gap that exists and the work that needs to do. And I think for me, it's what both Olle and Sandro, you both said, is shifting security left. We need to keep banging the drum on that. But I think the regulations that we're seeing being put in place by both the EU and over here in North America will force that. Definitely, if you've got somebody looking at what they should be doing next after they've been laid off from Amazon or Meta, it's cybersecurity.
And it'll be interesting to see how we can bring this into TAD hacks.
Absolutely. No, I agree. We should discuss that further because we're planning on that, and I'll be announcing it in April, the TAD Hack and TAD Summit plans for October. But again, thank you, everyone, and wishing you all a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.